deductio ad absurdum starts by assuming the falsity of the thesis. If the thesis is false, what follows from it? And then you go on to show that what follows and should be true on the basis of the falsity of the thesis, what should be true, is itself false. So if that is false, then the denial of the thesis is false, and the thesis is true. Now, did you catch that? Get it out in writing, and you'll see. Okay, to prove A, what you do is start by asserting non-A. Okay, if non-A, then B. But B is false. Therefore, A is true. Again, you're looking blank. Must be Valentine's Day or something. Don't you just love this? Valentine's Day. Don't you just love this? All right, the wiggly line is the negative. At least you're awake. The wiggly line is the negative. Not A. All right, not A implies B. Okay, but not B. Now, if you deny the consequent, okay, you deny the antecedent. Not A, that is to say A. So you've proven A. Now, that's his procedure in these proofs. And you can trace it through for yourself. In the first case, he starts, you see, if we assume that the world had no beginning in time, then an eternity must have elapsed up to every given point of time. And therefore, an infinite series of states of things must have passed in the world. However, here it comes, an infinite series consists in this that it can never be completed. So an infinite series is impossible. And the beginning of the world is a necessary condition of its existence. The world had a beginning. This was what had to be proved. QED. There it is. So he does that sort of thing on the thesis and antithesis. In both those cases, the result is that both the thesis and the antithesis are proven to be true. That is an antinomy, isn't it? Contradiction of the law of non-contradiction. Well, he does the same again with the second one on 436. Every compound substance in the world consists of simple parts. Nothing exists anywhere but the simple or what's composed of it. There are indivisible units, you see. And the antithesis, no compound thing consists of simple parts. There exists nowhere in the world anywhere anything simple, indivisible. Well, his proof starts by assuming the opposites. On the thesis, he says, let us assume that compound substances did consist of simple parts. And off he goes on the reductio ad absurdum. The same again in the third conflict on page 440. Causality, according to the laws of nature, is not only causality from which all phenomena of the world can be adduced. In order to account for these phenomena, it's necessary to admit another causality, that of freedom. In the antithesis, there's no freedom. And off he goes again. And then the fourth one on 444, so forth. So what he does in these cases is to argue, then, that we can prove nothing because of these contradictions. We can prove nothing about the infinity of the cosmos in time and space as against its finiteness. We can prove nothing about divisibility as against indivisibility. Nothing about determinism as against freedom. Nothing about necessity as against contingency. You see? And because the arguments have equal weight on both sides, we really can prove nothing at all. And as a result, therefore, what we end up with on page 447, his conclusion to this section is that what he calls transcendental idealism. Notice that phrase is italicized. Transcendental idealism. Yes, transcendental realism would change mere representations into things themselves. Then in the second column, transcendental idealism, on the contrary, allows that the objects of external intuition may be real as perceived in space and time as represented, but space itself, as well as time, with all phenomena, are not things by themselves. They cannot exist outside of the mind. And so his phenomenal-luminal distinction is upheld. Do you follow that line of thought? I see David nodding his head. Okay, straightforward enough. Then turn your attention finally to the rational theology section, which begins on 463. And here what he's doing involves the three arguments for the existence of God, which up to his time were the traditional proofs. They are, one, the ontological argument, second, the cosmological, and the third, which he gives the fancy name of physico-theological, is really simply a version of the teleological argument. Okay? These are also the three arguments discussed by Hume in his dialogues concerning natural religion. Okay? So it's the same agenda at juncture. If you say, no, wait a minute, isn't there a moral argument for the existence of God? Yes, but Kant is the one who first introduced it. So that comes later on. Now, the ontological argument, then, first of all, you're familiar with it from Anselm, from Descartes, so forth. The idea of a being who necessarily exists. What's the problem here? Well, his problem is that it introduces the conception of necessity. It introduces the conception of necessity. Put it this way. God exists. What sort of a proposition is that? Now be careful. Kant says that is not a proposition. A proposition has a subject and a predicate. Exists is not, logically, a predicate. You see? Because when you predicate something, you ascribe a property. Existence isn't a property. To say God exists is simply to say to leave the rest of the sentence blank. So when the ontological argument says God necessarily exists, saying God is necessary being. You've got to predicate something. But as soon as you predicate necessity, you're invoking an a priori concept. You see? One of the categories of modality, contingency and necessity. So the ontological argument, you see, trying to unpack the concept of God as necessary being, I guess I did it along here, is invoking the concept. He asks, is this an analytic statement? You see? No, it's not an analytic statement. Logically, the term God, definite name, whatever, isn't logically the same as necessity. It's not analytic. Must be synthetic. But where then do you get the idea of necessity? So the ontological argument involves a priori problematic. Is simply a copula, linking subject and predicate. Now, the cosmological argument really depends on the ontological. Because the cosmological argument is arguing about causal dependence. Causal dependence. That is to say, it assumes the contingency of the cosmos on a necessary being. So it assumes the very thing which the ontological argument assumes. The cosmological argument presupposes the conclusion of the ontological argument. Now, of course, you could also have said that the concept of causation itself is an a priori category. Yes. All right, and then the teleological, the physico-theological, the teleological argument, well, what it's trying to do is to talk about the orderedness of the cosmos, the orderedness of things, the ordered unity which we observe, and to draw an inference from that. But that sort of an argument is arguing from the form, not the material existence of the cosmos. To argue from the form that it has is to argue for some architect, designer, you see. But you cannot affirm the existence of such a designer without having as your premise the existence of this ordered universe. But that is, would entail a cosmological argument for the existence. So the teleological argument would depend on the cosmological argument, which depends on the ontological argument. And since the ontological argument fail, none of them work. Now that's his line of thought there. Do you want to run that again? Okay, the conclusion, and then we'll go back. And the conclusion is that the teleological argument depends on the cosmological argument, which depends on the ontological argument. Since the ontological argument... Okay.
I don't understand how it depends on
How the teleological... Okay, the teleological argument is an argument from order to an orderer. So if an ordered universe exists, its cause must necessarily be an orderer. Now you've introduced something else, which is the subject of the cosmological argument. And the cosmological argument says it must be a necessary cause. But the idea of a necessary being, God is a necessary being, is what the ontological argument is like. So, okay. Yeah. You know, obviously the thing you find yourself asking is, well, why didn't this put an end then to all theistic arguments of this sort? You see? And the answer, I think, is twofold. One, very obvious one, not everybody agrees with Kant's epistemology. And if Kant's epistemology isn't stated, and the categories are not just purely a priori, then Kant's whole disproof of the arguments doesn't work. In other words, if you can establish the objective reality of such things as contingency and necessity, causal dependence, then you can make them work. You see, I have a friend who used to teach here with us, Stuart Hackett, who wrote a book called The Resurrection of Theism, in which he argues that the categories, Kant's categories essentially, are not only categories of thought, but categories of reality. You see? Now his argument for that is, what are the alternatives? One of the alternatives is skepticism. That's an absurd possibility. You see? And so if you're going to have any knowledge at all, then the categories have to apply to reality. In fact, he argues that way. But if the categories apply to reality, then the proofs must work. Or at least Kant's objection doesn't work. And so he adopts what Leibniz calls the pre-formation theory. Pre-formation between thought and things. Since our thinking is adapted to the way things are, the categories work. So that's obviously one way of going at it, whether Hackett's way with categories or a different way, more empirical. And the other alternative, of course, is to argue that existence is the proper predicate. You see? If existence is a proper predicate, then the conclusion of a proof can simply be, therefore God exists. And you don't have this business of necessity hanging around the metaphysics. So you get those kinds of alternatives coming up. But this is the classic passage in Kant. I'm inclined to think that, that of the two treatments, Hume's and Kant's, Hume's treatment of the arguments has had a more lasting influence. Possibly because dialogues are more readable than the critique of pure reason. I think Kant's position has had a tremendous influence, but simply because of his epistemology, not because of the way in which he worked it out in these disproofs. So Hume is, in that sense, the more important in the actual discussion of the proofs. Yeah. Okay, now, with this treatment of metaphysics, where does this leave him? Well, it leaves him on page 480. And check that. Check that. Kant says we cannot prove the existence of God. We cannot know in that Enlightenment sense of knowledge, we cannot know that God exists, any more than we can know those things about the cosmos, or know that you're a soul substance. We can't know those things. The idea of God is, however, an ideal. It's an ideal, a concept that we come up with because it completes the whole scope of our purported knowledge. It caps off everything else. Look on page 480, second column, new paragraph halfway down. The purely speculative use of reason, therefore, the supreme being remains an ideal only, but an ideal without a flaw. A concept which finishes and crowns the whole of human knowledge, the objective reality of which, though it cannot be proved, cannot be disproved. So if there should be an ethico-theology, not a physico-theology, he's contrasting the two. The teleological argument he labelled physico-theological. Now he's thinking of another possibility. Ethico-theological argument. If there should be an ethico-theology to supply that deficiency, transcendental theology, which before was problematic, would prove indispensable in determining its concept, in constantly testing reason, which is so often deceived by sensibility, not always in harmony with its own ideas. So this is an ideal, and if it can be proven that this being exists, then the ideal that we have from the teleological argument can come into play. And we can affirm that God is indeed the orderer, the architect, the wise designer of the entire cosmos. Okay? Yeah, because, and this is the previous paragraph, in spite of the insufficiency of the proof, transcendental theology has a very important negative use. You see, it's a regulative concept. It regulates your thinking about God. So if you can prove that God exists somehow, then what you think God is like will be regulated by this transcendental ideal. Okay? Now, that leads him into the final section labelled Opinion, Knowledge and Belief. And I urge you to read those two and a half pages very carefully, because they're crucial to understanding Kant's intention in the whole critique, and essential to understanding what comes later on in his other writings. Why, for instance, his shorter work on metaphysics is called the Prolegomena to any future metaphysic. You see, he has signed off on the rationalistic metaphysics of the past, but he's signing on to a future metaphysic. You see. And here you get his initial hint of something of a future metaphysic. On 381, he talks of doctrinal belief. He talks of doctrinal belief, and he talks of moral belief. Those two kinds of belief. Doctrinal belief has to do with this ideal that leads us to believe certain things about God as a supreme intelligent who has ordered things for the wisest of ends. But on the other hand, moral belief takes us further. Doctrinal belief is quite unstable, because you can't prove the existence of that being. But moral belief is different. Look at the bottom of the second column on 481. Because moral belief is based on action. That is to say, it's based on the fact that I must obey the moral law on all points. You see, and he goes on to suggest that if I must obey the moral law, then this has further implications of a practical validity about the existence of God in a future world. And at the very top of 482, he says nothing can shake this belief. It's a conviction that's not logical, but a moral certainty. It rests on subjective grounds, on the fact that I'm morally certain. You see, there's not a logical certainty, but there is a moral certainty. If we are morally bound to a moral law, then whatever follows from the existence of a moral law, I'm morally committed to. And he helps us then to anticipate the moral argument for the existence of God, which he develops not here, but develops rather in the critique of practical reason, on the basis of a developed ethic. So that the outcome of the critique of pure reason, you see, as he says in the introduction, is that he's doing away with knowledge, making room for belief. Okay. Well, that's a quick survey of the dialectic. Covers the ground. Okay, questions, comments, discussion? What? You're not talking as much today.
On the
Dan?
ontological argument, in his response to that, what he had to do with that? No, sorry, not the ontological, teleological.
Okay.
There was a different teleological, not the creator was the designer, but then in some way the matter already existed before the world existed in the designer.
Yeah. If he started by saying, we know the existence of a material world, that material world is also very orderly, he would have existence in the premise, he could get it into the conclusion. He'd still have to work on that concept of cause and effect. But how would he be able to say that matter exists if he hasn't already made his peace with the